Good morning. So two quick disclaimers. It's very early in the morning, and I am not a morning person, and I'm not adequately caffeinated. Second, my work is trying to apply the thought of Thomas Aquinas to economic thought. That's what makes my heart swell or whatever. And today is his feast day, so you'd think that would be propitious. And I went and wrote a talk that talks about Gustin. Okay. Anyway, the theme I decided to take up after listening to the many interesting talks yesterday was economics and evangelization, and the question I want to pose is, who exactly is evangelizing who? So now you might think that theology is trying to evangelize economics, and it usually takes the form of writing many, many tomes about how economists are too interested in self-serving behavior and they should advocate charity and altruism and economic justice and all these other very good things. And economists mostly listen to that and roll their eyes, not because they're uninterested in caring for the poor or trying to create a world of economic justice and prosperity for all, but rather because they think that's exactly what they're doing, and they don't understand why theologians think that they need to be evangelized on the subject. So I could spend some time talking about why theologians do think they need to evangelize on the subject, but from the economist's point of view, all they're arguing is that the best means for helping the poor, trying to promote economic justice, often works through markets and sometimes with a certain amount of government intervention, but that what we should be looking for is the right mix of policies, but we agree on what the goal is. And that a lot of, and this is what I'm not going to name names, at least one economist has explicitly said that he thinks the reason non-economists and especially theologians and ethicists think that the economists need to be evangelized on this subject is because they're really mired in the project of virtue signaling rather than actually trying to achieve these goals. Anyway, it's a dialogue fraught with a lot of mutual misunderstanding. But it seems to me that part of what's going on here is the theologians could look at all this and say, yeah, you're talking about the market, but I really suspect that the reason you're doing that is deep down, you kind of want to keep the money for yourself and spend it on yourself, that your stated intentions don't match what you're really doing. And in point of fact, the economists are going to look back at the non-economists and say, yeah, you think your intentions are to try to help and advocate for the poor, but deep down, that's not what you're really doing. There's something else going on. And so when they're critiquing each other, they're pointing at something that's below the level of intention and stated impulse. And I think what they're pointing at is the fact that we kind of share what Father Michael Sweeney helpfully pointed out to us is the social imaginary. We're all resting our debates on a set of premises that might be problematic, but because they're unexamined premises, there's just this view of the world that we can't help but seeing through. We don't see that that's really where the action is. So I thought, who better to talk about how do you get at what the social imaginary is and how it makes our so-called rational discussions a little bit weird, the way that they are weird. Who better than St. Augustine? City of God, to me, is the great text, the really great text that does this. I don't know how many of you know this book very well, but in the preface, Augustine says, he's writing to his friend Marcellinus, who is a fellow Christian in pagan Rome, and they're writing shortly after Rome has been sacked, which was very upsetting. And the sacking of Rome happened after Rome had adopted Christianity as state religion. So Marcellinus apparently has gone to his good friend Gustin and said, dude, my pagan neighbors are really upset with me, and they're saying, we adopted Christianity as the religion, state religion, and the Christian God let this happen to us. What kind of a God is that? We should go back to our old pagan gods. They did better by us. They got us an empire. It was awesome. And Marcellinus is saying, how can I defend the city of God against the charges of my pagan neighbors? Okay, and I wish I had a copy of it, but Augustine answered him in a book that's about this thick. And the way I read, and the first time I read this book, I was actually in a lot of debates with an atheist friend, and I picked up the first chapter of it, and it sounded like Augustine was saying something like, well, those pagan critics are forgetting that God has done some other good things for them. They might be grateful for that before they turn around and criticize him for the places where he's not so good. Oh, and by the way, if you look at the history, the Christian God's doing somewhat marginally better than the pagan gods had done. And I'm like going, I can't believe that this doctor of the church is being like this insanely stupid. That's not really what he's arguing. I think, and the way I teach it is I think his point is to say the question is insanely stupid. I think he's turning to Marcellinus and saying, why would you ask me this question? Because behind that question are the set of premises, the social imaginary. And in particular, it's a conception of what a God is and what a God is supposed to do. So from the pagan perspective, what is a God? The God is the person you go and make some sacrifices to, and then they deliver you the goods, which Gustin calls the beneficia. Beneficia, how do I say that? Anyway, the benefit, the goodies, okay? Whereas the Christian God, the Christian question isn't, why does God let bad things happen to me even though I worship him? The Christian question is, God loves me more than anything. He's letting these things happen to me for my good. How are these things good for me? On what deeper level are these apparently bad things serving the project of saving my soul? And there's a deep conversion involved in this. And the reason why the book is this long is because even though most Christians know in their head that God does let bad things happen to good people because God loves them and wants to draw them closer to him through various ways. We all, when I teach this, my students all nod. They get this right away. But we don't get it, right? We wake up in the morning after something as bad has happened and we're mad and we're like, why did God let this happen to me? And we're struggling with it like all the time. So anyway, one of my favorite sets of passages come in book 4. And he keeps kind of hacking at the social imaginary, that the purpose of God is to give us what we want. He keeps hacking at it. In book 4, he does it by describing pagan religion, the Roman religion. He says, these Romans, they have this catalog. It's this thick. You have this thick catalog of all these gods. And all these gods are in charge of all these possible things you might want to pray for. So you've got a God of health, and you've got a God of wealth, and you've got a God of marriage, and a God of this, and a God of that. But then he goes on this riff. He says, and we've got all these tiny little gods. It's like it's not enough for the Romans to have a God of the doorway, right? They have to have a God of the door jamb, and the door stoop, and the door panel, right? And he just goes on and on and on. There's all these tiny little gods. And he keeps hitting this over and over again. And the point he's trying to make is, and he builds up to this question, he says, look, if the Romans really think that the purpose of God is to deliver you happiness, why don't you just pray to the goddess Felicity? She's the goddess of happiness. Go pray to her for happiness, one-stop shop, right? You just go and you make your sacrifice and then you get your happiness. Instead, they're running around, with the god of safe childbirth and the god of this and the god of that. I mean, they're awfully busy trying to get the gods to do what they want. And the picture that develops is that what the Romans are really doing is they're micromanaging their gods, right? They're busy, they have this long menu of all the things that they want in life, and they're like ordering off the menu, right? And they're not going to just pray for happiness. Now think about that. Why wouldn't you just go pray for happiness? Why would you go pray for all these little things? It's because you want the happiness on your terms, right? And it's more important that it comes to you as you want it than as God might give it to you. And you can see that this is like the fundamental spiritual thing that a lot of Christians have absorbed whenever we're saying, why didn't God let me get that promotion? Like, what was wrong? Because we have an idea about what it takes for us to be happy. So now, how is Augustin's critique of pagan religion at all relevant to us? Because I'm fairly confident there's nobody in this country that's making a sacrifice to the goddess of the door jamb to make sure that their door functions properly, right? You call the guy to come and repair your door if you have a problem. But that, I think, actually is the point. Why do we not any longer pray to the pagan gods? We've developed a certain amount of mastery, right? We don't have to pray to the god of the well-functioning iPad because we can run down to Apple and buy a new one if we need one, right? So our new God really is Amazon. Like, something comes up, and I push a few buttons, and then it comes. And and the Amazon God is a pretty good God because 9 times out of 10, what I want shows up on my doorstep. Has this happened to you every now and then? The thing doesn't show up, or it's the wrong thing. I lose it. It's like, how could the God have failed me? Like, they're supposed to have sent me the right thing. Okay. So what I want to argue is that this tendency to think about how do I pursue my happiness? I pursue my happiness in terms of what's on my menu, and then I want control over things. If I'm Roman, I have to sacrifice to the gods. If I'm an American, I work hard to get enough money so I can order what I want off of Amazon and be done with it. But I want control over how things go for me. That's a rock bottom part of our social imaginary. And I want to further argue that because it's in place, it makes it a little bit harder for us to think truthfully about what it would take to live well and in right relationship with material wealth and with our neighbors. Okay, so how does that work? Pause. It seems to me that economics is a major carrier of the social imaginary that we all inhabit. I don't want to go so far as to say that economists caused it, but I do think economics enjoys its prestige because it resonates so strongly with it. Father Michael reminded us that a couple aspects of our social imaginary is that we're fundamentally atomistic individuals and that we think about things transactionally. I want to add a third. That we think that happiness involves getting what we want. Okay, there's other ways to think about happiness, namely wanting what you get would be another way to go up. And Gustin is kind of asking you to do the spiritual transition of finding happiness by loving what God gives you, right? And all the spiritual learning that you have to do, which, by the way, is a fantastic journey. I'm being formed by this. I haven't made very much progress, but it's a fantastic spiritual journey. Anyway, but economists are carriers of this other counter message, and it comes in the form of saying that the basic principle that humans use to make their decisions is they try to maximize their utility. That is, they have their menu of goods, they have their limited resources, they make some rational allocation to get as many of those goods as they can, to get as high up their utility ladder as possible. Is everybody good with this idea? A non-economist might come in and say, see, they're all about selfishness, but an economist is going to be quick to say, no. I didn't say anything about what's in your utility function. I didn't say anything about the kinds of goods you might want to have. You might be some greedy Wall Street tycoon who wants a bunch of penthouses, fine. But you might also be Mother Teresa who wants to feed the hungry and succor the poor. And in both cases, you have a list of goods that you want, and you're doing this allocation thing. Okay. Oh, I'm halfway through my talk and I'm out of time. Okay. I'm going to end I'm going to take 3 more minutes if that's okay. So the problem isn't the content of the utility function, because economists think that it can handle everything, but it's carrying this deep social imaginary through the form. And I think the best way to see that is through an example that I like to teach my students, given by Gary Becker, who is a recently deceased economist, Nobel laureate, who tried to extend the economic model of human behavior to all aspects of human life. And one of his famous examples is the marriage market. So we should think about acquiring our spouses as a form of a market. Now, there's obviously not a catalog where I can go up and finally order the husband I want and have him delivered to my doorstep by Amazon. There's not a market like that. The way it works... let me know where it is, because I'm single. I'd like to... Okay. The way the marriage market works is when I go on the marriage market, the price I can pay is the value of myself, right? So we're all busy assessing each other in terms of our values. So, and guys do this, I think, more obviously. There's a 10, there's a 9, there's an 8, right? And you want to get the highest rated person you can get on the marriage market. And that's, by the way, might include qualities like, I like hanging out with them. They're funny. I have care and concern for them. They're perfectly good goods that you might want. So, unfortunately for me, I'm like a 2 or a 3, so I could only command a 2 or 3 in the market, and I'd rather be single. So, no, this is how he puts it. And so I'm rationally single. And because of the way the market works, we all have an incentive to try to present ourselves as higher up the scale than we really are, so we get all dressed up for our dates, and we try not to belch and things like that. But then we get married, and we start not dressing up, and we start belching. And some of us are going to find that we're now in a marriage where we'd rather be single, or we'd rather like to go back out on the marriage market and try to re-optimize. And if that was the case, you would rationally get a divorce. And okay, you get the picture. Okay. What's wrong with that? Most of my students are like, well, you can't think about love as a marriage market, right? There's something more to it. But trying to articulate why exactly why this is not a good model is hard. Among other things, did you notice that it actually does describe a fair amount of human behavior? It's fairly descriptive. Okay, so there's actually something to it, which is to say, I think the social imaginary actually has shaped how we look at marriage. Okay, but to cut to the chase really fast, what's missing from this is the idea that you marry somebody for better or for worse. And when you marry them, the deep good of marriage is finding out over that 40 or 50 years, right, how to love this person for better or for worse. And you have to grow into it, right? And notice that it's a matter of receiving the happiness that's on offer, rather than having some list of a menu that you're going to try to chase down. Do you guys see what I'm... Okay. So I've run out of time. What I'd like to say is because we're all deeply, and I include myself very much in this, deeply informed by the social imaginary, it distorts how we look at these economic questions. And I would love to be able to give you the next chapter. Is if you can get into this other social imaginary, or the Christian social imaginary, you can go back and look at economics and actually find a lot of resources that could be turned to God's glory and goodness and to the goodness of others in a way that I think would be more helpful. But the point really is just first we got to worry about conversion to get there really well. Thank you.